Hi guys, and welcome to my... Hi guys, I noticed that there was an extreme lack of video game content on my channel, which is pretty weird because that's my favorite medium, but I guess it's because not too much has come out in the past few months when I've started uploading consistently that I'm interested in, so I didn't really have anything to talk about. So instead of talking about something new, I thought what would be cool is to look back on one of my favorite games of all time, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, and talk about its combat system because A, I want to flex on everyone that I beat the boss rush like a few months back, and B, because I think it has the single greatest combat system of all time. Of the stuff that I've played, obviously, but that's a lot of games, I swear. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna prove to you how much of a gamer I am. Just 1 second. Okay, basically, every time I sleep with someone, right? I verbally declare that I am a true gamer, and I make sure that every woman who sleeps with me signs this notebook to verify that that statement is in fact true. Notice how it has 0 signatures. That's because I've never gotten laid. That's how much of a gamer I am. Okay, so now that we've basically established that you can trust my opinion, let's get into the meat of this video. Also, don't judge my gameplay. I didn't play for a few months, and I didn't practice before recording these parts. So, I'm good at the game, okay? Shut up. Keeping the basics simple. I've talked about how much I love simplicity in media on this channel before, namely on the 1917 and Office videos, but I need to clarify that by keeping things simple, I never mean just doing the bare minimum or not having depth to your final product. More so what it means is that certain creators who are very well versed in their understanding of both their audience and their medium are able to use potentially complicated methods or layers on layers of subtlety to create and present something which can appear to the audience as simple and stripped down. Like I said, 1917 does this with its cinematography and editing. To the viewer, it's presented as one long take, and while we're aware that that's not easy to pull off, it comes off as minimalistic and stripped down to the bare essentials. But of course, the lengths the crew needed to go to in order to make this all work is nothing to be scoffed at. This took an incredible amount of technical knowledge and also an understanding of the audience and how this presentation would aid the story. I'd say another great example is the opening to Inglourious Bastards. To the viewer, this is just a conversation. It's literally just like a super long conversation. I think it runs for 15 minutes or something, but almost everyone I know, including myself, isn't bored during this scene. In fact, this is one of the most captivating scenes from any movie I've ever watched in my opinion, and again, it's done by using an acute knowledge of filmmaking and using incredibly subtle but effective techniques which come from a true understanding of the craft and the audience. Sekiro feels like an important milestone for game director Hidetaka Miyazaki because it feels like the point where he understood game mechanics and design to such a high degree that he could create a game blindfolded, and he could also do it more efficiently than he or any other action game director had ever done before. The crux of Sekiro's combat, and by that I don't mean special moves or buffs or prosthetics or even specific counter moves, we'll talk about that in one of the later sections. I mean the true basics, is 2 buttons. Filming someone play this game would basically look like one of those commercials where they get a celebrity to pretend to play something but the controller isn't even on. You have a hit button and a stop yourself from getting hit button. You could argue that the circle button is a part of it too, but it's not really a dodge or anything, it's more of a sidestep or a backstep that's mainly used for breathing room during combat. I wouldn't argue too hard with someone who insisted that it's a basic necessity of the combat, but to me, it's really just these 2 here. Conversely, most action games have at minimum 3 buttons for their basic combat, and those who have less almost always fall into the trap of feeling boring. Those 3 buttons are typically 2 attack buttons for heavy and light attacks, and a defensive button like a dodge or a block. Again, this is the minimum, and a lot of games can have things like ranged attacks, multiple defensive buttons, including either a designated button or a time-based system for parrying, and stuff like weapon swapping. The main reason for having multiple attack buttons or multiple ways you can attack enemies is to add to the fun factor and variety more so than it is a necessity for actually beating an enemy. There are occasionally situations where it's better to use one than the other, and sometimes the game tries to justify the need for it by adding enemies that can only be dealt with if you, say, take their shield out with a heavy attack, but that's still a case of trying to inject variety into the combat, not necessarily make both options functionally important. They both still serve the same purpose of hit thing, make owie. Effectively, this creates a somewhat artificially introduced element to the fun factor of the game, and while I have no issue with that, honestly, because I'm fine if you artificially make a game fun, because, I mean, fun is fun, it's all good in my books, but it does make you wonder what a more natural form of creating engaging combat would be. From Software took a half step in figuring this out when they made Bloodborne before they ultimately pulled it off ridiculously well in Sekiro. Compared to Dark Souls, Bloodborne is definitely more streamlined and less focused on offering variety, opting instead for a focus on its melee system with a smaller array of weapons, but ones that are more diverse. Not only did it remove magic options and highly reduce the importance of ranged attacks to the point that they're basically just used for parrying, but more importantly, they entirely removed the ability to block. The offset to make this work was to make enemies more aggressive, make everything faster to pressure the player to play more reactionary than off of patterns, and tighten the timing with significantly less iframes. Both games have a very similar structure, but while one adds entertainment value with more complex systems and mechanics and options, the other provides entertainment value more organically through speed and timing. While neither one is necessarily better than the other, to me you get more out of every hit and dodge in Bloodborne than you do in Dark Souls. Sekiro, like I said, took this a step further. It takes the slightly arbitrary, if fun, light and heavy system and says to hell with it. You can do a slightly heavier attack here, but it's mapped to the same button as the normal attack, you just gotta hold it. You also can't create a string or combo of attacks here either, which is another big element of 2-button attack systems. The way you attack here is just back and forth, until you hold the attack button, which you don't do too often, in which case it always defaults to the same animation. The core combat here is almost robotic and surgical, but that's because the actual button presses are only the skeleton of the gameplay, whereas the actual substance is in the speed, timing, decision-making, and reading tells. And while all of From Software's games also have these elements, as do many action games, Sekiro almost entirely relies on these intangibles in order to carry its combat. This is reflected even in decisions like choosing the block buttons to also double as a parry, with the only distinguishing factor on whether you do one or the other being your timing. This definitely isn't the only game that's ever done this, of course, but it does back up the idea that this game was focused around intangibles over hard and fast systems. The majority of your time with this game's combat is consistent of doing something functionally simple over and over, with the fun and difficulty in the game stemming almost entirely from time-based elements. And that segues us nicely into the idea that Sekiro is a rhythm game. Other people have made this claim before, and it's one that I fully agree with. A big reason why rhythm action games like Pistol Whip and BPM, or even just normal rhythm games like Beat Saber, Guitar Hero, or Tap Tap are so rewarding is the feeling of perfection. Knowing that you did something exactly right at the exact right time, better yet, doing that multiple times in a row. You might not have the fancy moves or the improvisation with these games, but they favor the feeling of that perfect catch and shoot that ends with nothing but net. These games are almost always mechanically simple, and a lot of the most addicting ones have you just slicing the right way with the right hand or pressing a single button in the correct direction. Sekiro doesn't have music, but attacking and blocking to the right time, especially since that time is usually fast, at a consistent tempo, and introduces important mechanics like delays and moments of rest, feels like more of a dance than a combat system, and therefore also feels more like a rhythm game than an action one. You constantly exchange who the aggressor is, and the trade-off between your turn to attack and your enemies is always fluid. There's even a tell for when an enemy has parried your attack, meaning they're about to unleash hell, and trying to attack them again will lead to you getting your ass beat, conveyed with a little extra resistance and a large flash. You see that tell and you know it's time to go on the defensive. Bide your time and time your parries and look for an opening to go on the offensive again. This is important because you're able to read emotion or action before the attack tell from an enemy even begins, allowing you to anticipate and continue to adjust to the flow of combat. A lot like how rhythm games allow you to see blocks or enemies or whatever that are coming up after the ones immediately in front of you, so you can subconsciously prepare to deal with them once they actually arrive, even though your focus is mainly on your immediate surroundings. You cannot button mash in this game, and while that's true for all of FromSoft's previous games as well, this is the one where it's hardest to control that urge, since everything is so much faster. The issue is that an enemy can take advantage of your lapse in focus in an instant, flipping on a dime and delivering you a world of hurt the second you fall victim to a constant rhythm. A parallel to a true rhythm game would be when, after you've performed the same pattern for 3 of the 4 choruses in a song, all of a sudden the 4th one places things in slightly different areas or speeds things up. And if you're not constantly paying attention, it's hard to readjust yourself and get back on track instead of being stuck between the muscle memory of the previous choruses and what you're currently seeing on screen. Take that exact same concept and place it after every single attack, and you have the constant pressure Sekiro puts on you to make the right move and readjust yourself at any moment. After every attack, you have to take a split second to assess the stance and motions of the enemy to know if it's safe to attack again or if you should go on the defensive. Everything feels more tight and precise because of this, and that brings us to the emotional roller coaster of Souls combat. The Soulsborne games pre-Sekiro were already considered to have some of the best combat out there because they called for you to be both predictive and reactive at all times. You should try to pick up on patterns, tempos, and tells to try and figure out what's most likely coming your way, but you also had to process quick attacks, often in succession, and try to dodge or block to keep from getting hit. If you've played a Souls game before, you've probably made the ugh face. It's the face you make when you see a tell late and you try to dodge and aren't sure if you'll pull it off or get entirely ass blasted within a millisecond or two. The relief that washes over you when you dodge one of these attacks is usually some of the most exhilarating moments of the combat. It's really exciting to hit a last second dodge and see your character in a position to strike and take the upper hand. As exciting as that is in the previous games, however, Sekiro essentially truncated this roller coaster into a single motion and doubled the height of the drop. In the example I just gave, the beginning of the dodge has you worried, the end has you relieved, immediately after has you hopeful, and the next motion makes you feel accomplished if pulled off correctly. Sekiro takes you through that entire journey I just mentioned there in a single motion, and a much faster one at that. Because the tells and attacks are so much faster in this game, almost every attack an enemy sends your way, at least if you're inexperienced with the game, is an ugh moment. You have to react so quickly and precisely, and you're always on the edge of your seat when you see a sword coming your way. But if you do time it correctly, because of the nature of the posture meter, you can instantly jump from, oh god, this is gonna hurt, to,
Yeah, I'm a bad bitch, you can't kill me.
the very thing that was about to maybe ruin your run with this boss has instantly turned into an advantage, which is one of the biggest reasons these games are so fun to begin with, and it's a feeling you get quickly and constantly with the way that this combat is designed. Now, I've been discussing Sekiro's combat so far as if it's entirely confined to the basics of attack and block, and while I think that's important to fully dive into because it's a good 70 to 80% of the combat, and it's the core of what I think makes this combat system so good, if this was all the game was, it would eventually get easy and kind of boring, considering it's like 50 hours long and has one difficulty system, unlike rhythm games that are usually played for short bursts and have multiple difficulty levels that add complexity and turn up the speed. The faster it is, the more you need to rely on patterns and what makes sense to come next through the knowledge of the game, and if Sekiro adopted this approach of making everything just faster eventually, it would lose the reactionary element to its combat and turn the game entirely focused on patterns, which isn't horrible, but it's definitely not as deep. So what FromSoft did instead was add an extra element, something not too complicated or difficult to deal with, but when mixed in properly at the right time, would use its own simplicity and the player's familiarity with the basic flow against them, which would make sure that there was never a point where you ever felt relaxed during a new combat encounter. Let's talk about unblockables. Unblockables in this game are, to me, the last piece of the portrait that is Sekiro's genius combat. I'll touch quickly on special abilities and prosthetics at the end, but to me those are icing on the cake. The actual components that make up this masterclass of a system are everything I mentioned about the basics of attack and block combat, and the unblockable attacks. Now, we need something to glue this all together, so we aren't done just yet, but let's get into why unblockables are so important. Like I mentioned, 70 to 80% of your time in combat will be spent attacking and blocking / deflecting, and you'll be doing so at an understandable tempo and rhythm, albeit one that might be difficult to pinpoint for a while when you're introduced to new enemies. The role of unblockables seems at first glance to disrupt that rhythm, to catch the player off guard after they've been lulled into a sense of sleep and hit them with something that comes out of the blue, but that's only partially true. The way I like to think about it is by comparing it to juggling, of all things. Learning to juggle with 3 objects, then 4 objects, then 5, etc. will always take some adjustment and learning, but eventually you get a sense of the rhythm of the whole thing and you're able to get each of them down effectively. Now say, all of a sudden, without warning, while you're juggling 3 objects, somebody throws a tomato at you because they think you suck. Now, while you know how to juggle 4 things, you've never had to adjust for a 4th object to be thrown at you partway through and everything is going to fall apart. That thrown object is an unblockable attack. It sends something else your way that can't be dealt with in the same manner after you've been able to deal with the more simple, straightforward patterns of the basic combat. Eventually, however, with more practice, you should be able to adjust partway through and catch an object in the middle of your routine, and that has its own flow and rhythm to it. Now, all of a sudden, instead of this outside object being an intrusive entity, it becomes part of the overall flow, a flow that is now more dynamic and calls for you to pay attention more often, because at any moment you might have to deal with something being hurled your way. Unblockable attacks are a key element to the dynamism of this system. They're more infrequent and slightly more difficult to deal with than the norm, but you're also able to use these to your advantage if you prepare for it and adjust the way you need to. It's also important to mention that the reaction to these unblockables is not always the same, and you need to quickly decide whether it's an attack you're meant to jump over or away from, or one you need to counter. Without overloading the player's sensors, since it's only one of 2 decisions, it still means that you have to be reactive instead of running on autopilot. Before I bring up the final element, the glue that holds everything together and truly elevates this game to god tier level, I do want to touch quickly on why I think things like special abilities and prosthetic tools are more of a side dish to the main course that I've dived into here. Simply put, the main purpose of both of those things is convenience, which to me is not all that important in shaping the system itself. I don't think these elements are bad, but they're really only here for a very specific purpose or as a way to do a bigger burst of damage. It's cool that I can tell Lady Butterfly to screw off during one of her attacks by throwing a shuriken at her, but it doesn't change much besides making things slightly more convenient. Same with using a special ability or using firecrackers to get off a couple of free hits. It's nice to have and it tips the balance in your favor for a second, but again, it's really just about convenience, and if these things were removed, yeah, it would slightly affect the overall quality because they can be really fun to use, but no part of it makes or breaks any real part of the game. Just thought I'd throw my explanation in here for as to why I didn't really explore that kind of stuff. To me, it's just not really important for the specific discussion at hand. Okay, with that out of the way, and after bringing up so many genius decisions in this game already, let's finally discuss the single best element of this game, the one that ties everything together in the best possible way, while still remaining ridiculously simple: the posture system. When you block, get hit, or an enemy parries you, your posture goes up. When you parry attacks, your posture doesn't really move, and when you don't get hit, your posture goes down. The speed at which it goes down depends on how much health you have. The end. It's literally you get hit, it goes up, and you don't get hit, it goes down, and it's the single greatest thing I've seen in my goddamn life. Sometimes it legitimately pisses me off how good this system is. Like, how did you make something that works so well while literally being the simplest thing on the planet? Instead of a parry stopping someone entirely in their tracks and allowing you to get a chunky hit in on them, parrying becomes part of the flow, every instance of it giving you a bit more of an advantage. Making it so that filling an enemy's posture meter serves the exact same purpose as taking down their health bar is so genius, because now you can pursue defense as an effective offense. You invite the enemy to hit you, because if you can read them correctly, every hit they send your way is them getting closer to signing their own death certificate. When they stop hitting you, you push them so that they don't have time to recover their posture. You're constantly aggressive, even when you're stopping yourself from getting hit. A lot of the times you need to go for a hybrid approach, especially for enemies that recover their posture quickly. You need to focus on evading and getting in hits that they can't block so that their posture recovery is significantly slower. It's no longer just a rhythm game, it's a thinking game too. In previous Souls games or other action games, you really just don't want to get hit and you want to hit the enemy, but here everything is viable. Every move you make can be anywhere between a horrible loss or a huge victory. When I'm fighting Pond of Sullivan and I gotta dodge him like 8 times in a row, that's fun as hell, but every dodge is a purely defensive move and I have no choice in that matter. But when I see Genichiro get ready to throw out that big combo that always used to mess me up when I first started fighting him, I get so excited because I'm about to absolutely rattle this poor man to the core of his existence, all by never hitting the attack button once. The posture system works so beautifully with the simple mechanics of the combat that it creates for a game where not a moment is wasted, not a single action goes without positive or negative consequence, not a breath is not baited. Sekiro has a perfect combat system, and that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you agree or disagree with any of my points in the comments. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I'm really tired, and we're just gonna end the outro here. I'll see you next time. Peace.